Hello Americans channel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images and video we use just for explanation, and it's free use also.
When this woman opened her bank account app, she couldn't believe her eyes. She always struggled with her finances and worked hard to just put food on the table for herself and her young daughter. But her life was about to change forever. Because on this very day, her bank account suddenly showed over $37 million. But there was a catch. Woman finds $37 million deposited in her bank account, then she discovers why. Kiera Peterson was an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. She was the kind of person who blended into the background, the kind of person who seldom attracted attention. Her life was a series of routines, from her long shifts at the diner down the street to her part-time gig as a babysitter for the children next door. She lived in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment. It was a cheap apartment in the city, a place she could barely afford despite her dual employment. Kiera was a hard worker. She had to be, considering she had no one to lean on but herself. Her father, who had passed away a few years back, had instilled the value of hard work in her. He had been a factory worker for his entire life. He was a man whose palms were as hard as his resolve, who had spent his entire life ensuring Kiera and her mother had food on the table and a roof over their heads. Kiera's mother had passed away not long after her father, leaving her alone in the world. But his work ethic stayed with her. She would not complain and worked hard to provide for herself and her own daughter. The 23rd of April started like any other day for Kiera. She woke up at the crack of dawn, brewed herself a strong cup of coffee, and prepared for another day of serving meals and soothing crying children. As was her routine, she logged into her online banking app to check her account balance before heading out to buy groceries. She would always check the bank app before heading to the store. She never had a lot of money to her name, and she didn't want to look like a fool when it was time to check out her products. But this morning, something was different. The numbers on her screen didn't make sense. There were too many digits. Way too many. She blinked and looked again. The number remained the same. $37,203,337.66. The sum was so large that it hardly fit on her small phone screen anymore. Confusion clouded Kiera's mind. This must be a huge mistake, she thought, perhaps some kind of banking glitch. She decided to head to her local bank to clarify the situation. The morning was unusually sunny, but Kiera barely noticed. Her mind was buzzing with the number she had seen on her screen. $37 million. At the bank, she punched her details into the ATM. The ATM beeped and whirred, the mechanical sounds echoing around the small vestibule. It was a slightly run-down machine, its screen scarred with the marks of 1,000 previous transactions. For a moment, she held her breath. She half expected it to be some sort of cruel prank. She knew that yesterday she had only $40 left on her account, so anything more than that would not be able to come out of this machine. She entered her code and pressed OK. The machine whirred, and the screen lit up with the same astronomical number. Kiera's heart pounded in her chest. She hit the withdraw option and opted for $200. She waited, her heart pounding in her chest. If the transaction was successful, what would that mean? But then the slot in the front of the machine clattered, and a neat bundle of bills was dispensed. 2 crisp $100 bills slid out of the dispenser. Kiera stared at them, her mind racing. This was real. The money was real. A knot of anticipation tightened in her stomach. She reached down, the cool touch of the crisp bills feeling surreal in her hand. She pulled them out and, for a moment, stared at the bills in her hand. She felt like $1 million. No, $37 million. She corrected herself with a small laugh. She'd always been the kind of woman who found humor in unlikely situations. But this wasn't the time for laughter. This was reality, not some comedy show. She looked down at the ATM screen again. The huge number still stared back at her, the digits unchanging. Confusion turned to shock, then to fear. The world suddenly seemed a much more dangerous place. She was a woman with $37 million in her bank account. As she walked out of the bank, the world seemed to spin around her. She was a millionaire. A multimillionaire. But how? Why? Kiera had always been the kind of woman who believed that such windfalls were the stuff of dreams, of fairy tales. But this was real. Now, the question that lay ahead was, where had the money come from? And, more importantly, what was she going to do about it? As Kiera started on her journey to find the answers, she was unaware of the twists and turns her life was about to take. Because the $37 million was just the beginning. That was not a safe place to be. She had no idea where the money had come from, but she knew one thing for sure. Money like this did not just appear out of nowhere. Someone, somewhere, had made a mistake. And mistakes like this had consequences. She hurried home, clutching the $200 tightly in her hand. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Had she been hacked? Was this some sort of scam? Or worse, was she being set up? She needed help, but who could she trust? This large of a number could make people act strangely. She needed sound advice. When she got home, she dropped onto her worn-out sofa, the old cushions barely registering her weight. Her small apartment seemed suddenly suffocating, the cramped space closing in around her. She looked around at her humble surroundings, the mismatched furniture and hand-me-down decorations. They were a stark contrast to the unimaginable fortune that had fallen into her lap. She took out her phone and logged into her online banking app. The number was still there, a long string of digits that seemed to take up the entire screen. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a screenshot, the familiar click sound seeming deafening in the quiet room. She had no idea what to do next. She felt like she was trapped in a bad dream, one from which there was no escape. But then she remembered something her father had always told her. When you're in trouble, he would say, the first thing you do is try to understand why. And so she decided to investigate. She would track down where this money came from. She had no idea how to start, but she knew she couldn't just sit around and do nothing. She was a woman with 37 million reasons to find out the truth. As she started her journey into the unknown, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement mixed with dread. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. But one thing was for sure, her life would never be the same again. This would be the adventure of a lifetime, a story that was just beginning to unfold. And she was at the very heart of it. She was a woman with a mystery to solve, a riddle that had 37 million answers. And she wouldn't rest until she found them all. The question was, would she like what she discovered? Only time would tell. But for now, she knew one thing for sure, she was a woman on a mission. And nothing was going to stand in her way. The first person she thought of was Debbie. They had been friends since high school and had kept in touch throughout the years. Debbie worked in a local accounting firm and was knowledgeable about financial matters. So, Kiera dialed her number, her fingers trembling as she hit the call button. Debbie's voice was a welcome sound. She explained the situation in a rush, her words tumbling over each other in her haste. Debbie was silent for a moment before asking Kiera to meet her at the office. They needed to talk about this in person. She agreed, hanging up the phone and preparing herself for the journey ahead. Her next stop was the local newspaper. She had always been an avid reader, scouring the pages for news and stories. It was there that she met Ben, a reporter who had covered some of the city's biggest stories. She trusted him and knew that if anyone could find out where the money had come from, it would be him. Her investigations led her all over the city. She found herself in neighborhoods she had never been to before, talking to people she would never have met in her ordinary life. She discovered hidden parts of the city, places filled with stories and secrets. Each clue led her to another, creating a trail that seemed to weave all over the city. Her life became a whirlwind of meetings and discoveries, each day bringing a new piece of the puzzle. She found herself falling into bed each night, exhausted but unable to sleep, her mind buzzing with possibilities. In the meantime, she did not spend a dime of the money. She even kept the $200 she pulled from the ATM in an envelope on her nightstand. Kira still worked hard at her 2 jobs, so her little daughter could be fed and the rent could remain paid. But every bit of free time was spent on finding out the truth. She walked around town at random and knocked on every door. At first, to no result, but then, slowly but surely, she began to put together the pieces. Each clue, each lead unraveling a piece of the puzzle. But then the final piece fell into place as her contact from the newspaper called. A mysterious note came into the office. The sender wanted to remain anonymous at the moment, but the person knew that Kira was searching. The person asked to pass one message. And that one message asked Kira to come to one particular address. 561 North Glen Creek Street, Fairfield, California. She wasted no time and drove her car to the address. It was a huge house on the outskirts of the city, a place she had only seen in her dreams. Kira found herself standing in front of the house one sunny afternoon, her heart pounding in her chest. She approached the front door, her steps echoing in the silent street. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves, and knocked. The door swung open, and standing in the doorway was a woman. She was elegant and sophisticated, her age hard to determine. She looked at Kira with a bemused expression. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice smooth and calm. Kira looked back at her, a million thoughts racing through her mind. She had come so far, discovered so much, and now she was standing in front of the woman who might have all the answers. But as she opened her mouth to speak, the woman's expression changed. It was a look of recognition, of surprise. And Kira knew this was just the beginning. The old woman, whose name was Mrs. Hathaway, led Kira into her grand living room. The room was tastefully decorated, an embodiment of elegance and refinement. The two of them settled into plush chairs, a hot cup of tea in hand. As Mrs. Hathaway shared her story, Kira listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest in anticipation of the news that was about to come. Mrs. Hathaway explained that her wealth had been passed down through generations and had been sitting idly in her bank account. She wanted to put it to good use, to help those less fortunate in her own community. "I have no family left," she said, her voice steady despite her age. "But what I do have is an opportunity to make a difference. That's why I chose you." She had been watching Kira for some time, impressed by her work ethic, resilience, and care for her community. "You are the kind of person I want to help, and the kind of person I trust to help others," Mrs. Hathaway said. Her assignment was straightforward yet overwhelming. Kira was to handpick 50 deserving individuals from their community who would benefit from a share of the money. In addition, $12 million were to be used to fund a local project that would benefit the entire town as a whole. Kira asked why she had decided to do this now. Mrs. Hathaway looked at her, her blue eyes clouded with sadness. "I'm dying, Kira," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The doctors have given me 6 months. I want to see the good this money can do before I leave this world." Kira was moved by her words and determination. She wasted no time and got to work immediately. She used her connections in the community and, after thorough consideration, assembled a list of 50 deserving individuals. These were people who were struggling, but who had shown remarkable resilience in the face of adversity. Mrs. Hathaway approved the list and the money was distributed. Kira watched as their lives transformed. Single mothers could now afford a decent home and education for their children. Small business owners received the boost they needed to keep their establishments running. A talented, but financially struggling artist was able to hold his first exhibition. It was a joyous and humbling experience. The remaining $12 million was invested in a community project. After much deliberation, it was decided that the money would be used to build a large park. This would not only provide a green space for the community, but also a place to host events where people could come together. The construction began and Kira supervised it personally, ensuring that every detail was perfect. Mrs. Hathaway, despite her failing health, was kept updated on every part of the progress. She watched from her grand house as the park began to take shape. Months passed and the project was completed. The park was beautiful, filled with lush greenery and spaces for people to relax and children to play. There was a stage for performances and community events. It was a place that brought the community together, a place that echoed with laughter and happiness. Sadly, Mrs. Hathaway passed away before the park's official inauguration. But she saw it in its near completion, her eyes shining with happiness. This is what I wanted, she told Kira in their last meeting, her voice filled with satisfaction and thankfulness to the woman who had helped her. The day of the park's inauguration arrived. It was named Hathaway Park in honor of the woman who had transformed the lives of so many people. Kira stood at the podium and unveiled a statue of the old lady. It was a beautiful day and the future looked bright for all. Kira herself was happy to help and could now give her own daughter a bright future.